Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We need a big good morning now. Good morning. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to see as many of you that made it here today. After all, we threw at you last night, but you're a dedicated lot. First, I'd like to just thank Ryder for a great gala dinner last night at the World of Coca-Cola. I hope you all enjoyed that, and also the chance to hear from Michael Broders, the VP of Transportation, Warehousing, and Logistics for Coca-Cola Refreshments. And afterwards, of course, the wonderful Afterglow party nearby, hosted by Surgere, courtesy of, and the Lushy Louie, of course, which kept us going deep into the night. We kind of, at Automotive Logistics, we try to be a mature group and lead by example, professionals. We'd leave the partying to the younger ones. As you know, maybe you just need a reminder about which of the younger ones we do seem to let party the most, and just to wake you up a little bit. It's a little reminder of last night. Sorry, guys. Someone needs to wake up back there, actually. Okay, there we go. Little close-up for you, that one. Yes. Very good. The Slushy Lushy Louie. We'll let that one roll for you, maybe, just to wake you up a bit as we go into this. But seriously, thanks again to all of you who came and spent some time with us at the gala dinner, at the Afterglow, and of course, most importantly, during the conference itself. I think yesterday was a really great day. We heard a lot about collaboration, about how we can combine more aspects of the supply chain to find synergies, whether internally in our companies, whether working together, how we can leverage technology to do that in transport management, or perhaps with some future aspects with big data. And we're going to drill down a little bit more into that during this session as well, with our great set of speakers and panelists here. Just before I kind of introduce them, I wanted to remind you all once again, you have evaluation forms in front of you. I think I said it yesterday. We really would want your feedback by the end of today, please. We will have a little prize draw at the end, and we'll pull out one of those. And if you said nice things, we'll give you a prize, but no. No, but seriously, not to repeat myself, but we really, this time we really value the feedback a lot, because it's the first event for us here in Atlanta, and we want to make sure that we shape it accordingly. And just again to remind you about the live voting that we already did the live voting, the live app that we have, where you can message your fellow delegates, you can tweet, or you can watch the event remotely. Okay, so I wanted to introduce our panel to you today. Again, we're going to be focusing on big data, whether that's big data with a capital B, or maybe data mining, or aspects that we can use the ever-increasing amount of data and information we have in the supply chain, use it intelligently, use it strategically. I think we had some interesting insight from Coca-Cola yesterday about how they use the supply chain strategically, and some familiar things we heard about, whether it was weather or speed and inventory issues there. So this session, we're going to hear first from William Wappler, who, despite the Afterglow, is our first speaker. So fresh and early, we like to put him to the test, keep him in line that way. William Wappler, who's the president of Surgere. We'll next hear from Bridget Grewal, the Packaging Continuous Improvement Manager from Magna International. And joining us as a panelist to make some comments and also answer questions is Ben Shain, Director of Logistics at Nissan North America. So let's hand it over to Bill.
Thank you. So here's how you cause a problem. First, what you do is, we're about to embark in a dialogue that I think is maybe the most important topic that you'll have in your career. We're going to now have the fourth in a series of conversations that we've had all along, so we have some catching up to do. And I fed you quite a bit of bourbon last night. So we have to go through this quickly, and there's a lot to talk about. Let's not focus on the slides, let's focus on the story, okay? The slides will be available to you later. We can drill down into them over a cup of coffee another day. But I think that what we have to do is talk about what big data means to us, and more importantly, although we've seen and talked a lot the last day or so about some very ethereal subjects and maybe very high-level strategies, what I want you to do is have something you can go home with tomorrow that can kick off action, right? Not only do we have to think about strategies, but the fact of the matter is we have to do something about it when we go home. So that's my job today, and let's see how we're going to do that. First of all, let's kind of catch up on where we are. The auto industry is in a part of its history that is so interesting because the changes that are happening are changes that happen at every part of the industry, whether it's new drivetrains, new materials, new supply chains. All of those things are starting to happen around us, and they're happening at such speed. But not only that, what's really interesting is we're changing our business models, right? We hear about General Motors buying part of Lyft. We hear about Kansas City enacting a new business model with one of the OEMs where they're going to work together to try to figure out how they can join in a process that solves mass transit, public transit problems, and see what they can do together. So we're in a completely new dynamic, right? Well, I would submit that we're about to embrace a change that is probably, as far as dynamics go, going to come out of supply chain, and it's going to be more important than everything else that's happening in automotive. And if you think about it, supply chain has not been doing very well. We're falling short because think about this. I don't know if anybody knows Keith Oliver, but he coined the phrase supply chain in 80 to 82 on a project in the UK when he was with Booz Allen. And remember what that promise was? We would all be working together. We would all have total visibility of the supply chain. There would be no whips. There would be no peaks and valleys. Life would be happy, and we'd all smile. Anybody have that supply chain going on? No, not a one of us. So we're falling short, but there's a reason why that's going to change. And some of it is this. According to our clients, and this is one of them, what's happening is, the fact of the matter is, we're all judged every day. Cut costs, become more efficient, do it faster, better, all those things, right? It's a scorecard. We've been talking about scorecards. The fact of the matter is, though, accountability without data sucks, right? Because we're all working on assumptions. So here's what's happening. Your life is going to change, and it's going to change because of this. Yeah, and it's not because it's full of beer. The reason that it's going to change is that folks around us have created an interconnected network of smart devices. And the automotive industry is about to embrace that. Now, quite frankly, there are people that have gone before us, right? We're not the first. We're taking advantage of what's already been created. But the fact of the matter is, and I think this is a little conservative, I've read recently where maybe we're going to be dealing with 50 billion interconnected devices by 2020. Think about that. That's my phone talking to your phone, talking to your car, talking to your house, talking to all those things around us, gathering data. Well, the same thing's going to happen in your supply chain. So here's really what it looks like. We're surrounded by data collection activity, right? My opinion is the automotive industry isn't quite ready for this, but this is your future and it's coming really fast. So we're going to maybe this morning, with the help of Bridget and a few folks, we're going to help you kind of get into the mix and start preparing. Here's my prediction for your supply chain. My prediction is it will be fully visible, and it's going to be optimized, and it's going to be in the short term. And it's because of the refrigerator. So there are some components that are necessary. First of all, innovation. Oh my God, I hate that word because we overuse it. What commercial nowadays doesn't have innovation in it, right? We are the best innovators. We innovate this, we innovate that. The fact of the matter is, we don't really know what that means. Second part of it is big data and IIoT. If you're not in it, get in it. If you're not reading books, start. And then really at the end of the day, it's all about data transformation. And that's really where at the end of the day we need to be talking, because what that means is the folks that build the refrigerators and Apple and everybody else are creating your future right now, and they're going to transform the way you live. So that's not next year, year after, that's like tomorrow. And it's transforming our industry today. So we have to really get prepared. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you our studies. I'll share with you what we're talking with our clients about. I'll share with you what I think you should probably look at through our failure. We failed so many times at this before we got good at it. And I want to maybe stop you from driving off the road and hitting a tree. So we'll give you a little bit of that, but here's an example of what I mean by our future. Kodak, they used to be one of our best clients. I love those guys. We would go into a meeting and they would share how innovative they were. Every meeting. We have new chemicals, we have new paper, we have all these new processes. The colors are more vibrant. Aren't we great? Yeah, Steve Jobs came along. Anybody see any Kodak signs out there lately? No. And I can tell you, I remember going to Singapore. You go through a park, you'd see Kodak everywhere you went in the world. And then a young man came along that knew how to innovate. And that future is actually our future if we're not careful. So there are some elements that I think we should all think about when we talk about innovation. First of all is culture. Secondly is trust. And then faithful funding. And again, I'm going to kind of fly through this a bit, and this is all available to you. Here's what we've learned when we started studying, and I can assure you that it was a lot of hours and a lot of money to get here. First of all, it takes vision and leadership. I think marketing people are really good at the word. It's really difficult for a company to say we want to really be innovative. The other part is that you got to get the team right. Innovation is an incredibly difficult thing. And we have team members that are either good or bad at it. And we keep thinking, let's just fill the offices full of folks. And we really don't want to play with what they come out with. Excuse me. And what I mean by that is, we have another client, Tier 1 actually, and what happens is they put people on the team, and here's what goes on. Become innovative, right? Here's the job you have, innovate. And then what they do, they fail, because that's what innovators do, and then that's career limiting, or they're out of a job. So you got to get the team right, then you have to fund it, then you have to train for it. So I would suspect there are some black belts in here that have been through lean and all those things, right? Anybody in here at all been to training for innovation? You know, there are classes, there are seminars and everything else. Anybody been in one of those? Think about that. We want to be innovative and we're not even training our people. They don't know how to do it. It's not something intuitive. Then you have to release it in trust. And here's maybe the most important thing I'll tell you today. Of all the things that we talk about, it's this. If you have a devil's advocate in your company, kill him. Sorry, but you got to do that, because they're the people that will go into a meeting and they're going to say, we love this company, I've had my whole career here, and by gosh, I'm all for everything we want to do. And then every idea that comes up, they go, nah, don't think we can do that, tried that 20 years ago, tried that 5 years ago. If you have those devil's advocates in your staff, kill them. So let's talk about big data, because you can't get to big data unless you're an innovator. What is it? Well, first of all, big data is too darn big. There's nobody in this room that can handle big data today. The banks handle it, Google handles it pretty well, Capital One handles it, because among those three, they know more about you than you probably want to talk about, right? But the automotive industry isn't quite to the point where they're gathering enough data to have that kind of a conversation. And more importantly, if you're in the supply chain, you have none of it, right? The other thing about big data is that it's not obvious. It's not apparent data. And what I mean by that is, for those of you that have been following the Wall Street Journal in big data, they've been talking about people like Legos, right? Lego almost went out of business. They were buying parks and doing all these kind of really cool things. They almost went out of business. They hired a company, let's generate lots of big data. And they had some insight, but really what it took was a meeting with some young kids that taught them that what Legos were all about was sharing, hey, I built this, I built that. And it's this whole culture that big data won't give you. So my advice to you is start gathering data, look at big data, but it's not apparent data. And be very careful what you think you learn. However, here's what the good side is. Big data will be a critical component of how we live. We truly believe, as most people do, that big data will be the competitive differentiation in your life, and it's going to be gained by supply chain people more than anybody else in your company. Think about that. Supply chain people will have more access to data than anybody else in your company. Supply chain people don't run automotive. Other people do typically, right? We just react through heroics and hard work. But you'll have more data, you'll be able to use it better and have more impact on your company than any other part of automotive. So here's the thing. It's going to lead to data transformation, which means that with that information, you'll be a different company in the future, which is actually what supply chain was supposed to be about, right? And here's the best part. It's obtainable to you. And why? First of all, we have technology that we never had before. GPS. I know where your phone is all the time, right? Think about that. GSM, cellular. That's another reason I know where your phone is all the time. Near field communication. We call it Bluetooth. It's just smart stuff talking to each other. RFID. Doesn't work in automotive in the past, does now. Then we start layering those systems together. It's incredibly generous when it gives you data that you can, I hate our marketing people, they use the word actionable. That's a really strange word to me, but the fact of the matter is what it's doing is it's giving you information that you can do your job that you never had before. So here's what it looks like. Here's where we failed, by the way. We were way over on the left side of the page. Container management, right? That was our job. Everybody said we lose them. We don't know where they are. We have hundreds of millions of dollars worth of this stuff. There's no way we could pass Sarbanes-Oxley. You know, our finance guys are going, how much you got? We have no idea. And so they bring us in, we help process flow, we do all those kind of cool things. The fact of the matter is, everybody wanted to be on the right side of the page. And we couldn't get there. Think about that. Everybody wants to transform their business. And we just couldn't get there. It took some RFID, and I'm going to fly through this because this isn't just us. We happen to be really good at it, but there are other people too. And the point that I'm making here is, here's what you have to do. We use RFID, but there has to be some baseline technology that you incorporate into your business that gives you one thing. and that is a lot of very good data. Not a lot of data, a lot of very good data. What we decided that we needed to do to get from the left-hand page to the right-hand page where we could transform business is to look at a container differently. Container for our clients used to be, we put stuff in it, we transport it back and forth, and we really want it to be at the right place at the right time. That was the objective. Well, we kind of changed that. What we said was, no. What they really are is they're floating data points. We can tell you velocity, we can tell you dwell times, we can tell you heat mapping, all those things that supply chain people really wanted all the time, right? We're working with this, a fairly large retailer that once they started to look at the data that was given to them by all of these floating data points, they're mobile, they're ubiquitous, they're everywhere, right? What do? They pick up their distribution centers, move them to different states, because now they're not using LlamaSoft with assumptive data, they're using LlamaSoft with real data. So whether it's RFID or anything that you choose that we talked about before, whether it's GPS, GSM, all those data points, at least do this. Choose a technology and gather as much real data as you can. What we did is we started with RFID, then we looked at layering technology, which is the next step you're going to take, which means get the real data, get accurate data, and then start layering technology over it to make it more useful, right? The military taught us most everything we needed to know. We were called in to work with a special ops flight unit out of Fort Campbell. And what they said was, and this is scary, we lose missiles. And I'm going, no, don't even tell me about that. But the fact of the matter is their mission is to win. So what do? They flood a war zone with a lot of material so that they win, but at the end of the day, they don't really know what they sent. So they came to us and they said, here's what we want to know. We want to know where everything is. We want to know what the temperature is, what the humidity is. We want to know if it's seen light, which means did a bad guy open the box or not, right? We want to know everything about it anywhere in the world. Well, the reason I bring this up is that it has direct application for you. We have an OEM that we work with that's basically looking at this scene that you see, which is if I'm moving an engine from Asia to Mexico, and then I'm moving it from Mexico to Chattanooga or wherever it might be, you know what? It'd be really good if I knew if that sea container had been compromised by water, particularly salt water, right? What's the humidity, temperature, all those variants before it's on a truck and halfway to Tennessee. Those technologies are available to you and you're going to be making decisions with them. And I only lay this out to you because it's not tomorrow, it's today. So you have to really embrace it and move to it as quickly as you can. It is, I think, your biggest competitive advantage. So what does it give you? Well, you're going to have unparalleled connectivity. The deep, rich data is incredible. And now you're analyzing without assumptive data. You actually have real data. And thank God, now we can start optimizing, right? And evolving business models. So there's today. So what's it feel like? It feels a little bit like we start on the left, and by the way, that's the map that Christopher Columbus used. I'm surprised there isn't a sea monster that on the left that was going to eat them on the way. But here's where we live today. And this is kind of the analogy that I use most days because it's hard for people to embrace multi-layered, multi-differentiated technology to provide deep data. That's a very difficult thing to think about. Well, it's really easy if you use Waze. Do you use Waze on your phone when you're driving? Yeah, we all do, right? Well, Waze is on the right. We started with Christopher Columbus. When I was a young guy driving around, we had a map, you open it up, you try to find your way, and you're going, yeah, am I here or there? And that's about all you get. Today, with the help of all of our friends and interconnective data, I know, hey, there's a policeman there. I know traffic's going to slow. I'm going to take a left-hand turn. I'm changing my life because of interconnected data, which is what we're going to do as companies, right? So here's the most important challenge that I'll give you today, and then I'll yield to my friends. The challenge with this and transforming your business is not going to be data collection. We just talked about that. The devices that are out there and available to you today are inexpensive. They're ubiquitous. The thing that I was showing you, by the way, that we built for the federal government, you could almost buy all those parts at Home Depot tomorrow. Seriously, you've got more technology in your pocket with your phone than is typically driven through most of the technology being delivered today. It's out there, it's not expensive, there's a lot of folks that have it, and you can get it from a lot of different people. So it's not gonna be about data collection. That technology is available, you need to start using it. It's really not going to be about analysis. We've got great analytical tools. If you're not using LlamaSoft, and I'm sure all your companies are, if you're not using a lot of people that can help you through that, start it. And it's not going to be about the acquisition. Here's the challenge. It's how to use all of that to transform your business. That's the challenge. So really all I'm telling you today is that piece is the most difficult piece. You kind of have to start on that journey today. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you have to sell it in your companies, right? I don't know anybody in here that just gets a check and you can fill in the numbers and everything's okay. We all know what it's like to get CapEx and all those kinds of things, but here's what you have to build into your request for funding nowadays, which is really interesting because it's never been done before. You have a real-time supply chain. Think about that. You know, we've been talking about how interconnected supply chains may be our future, how we're going to be judging ourselves, right? KPIs, all those things. I will tell you that if we had all those speakers back up here, they would all tell you that that's using large data sets, not intimate data sets, and it's certainly not in real time. But you have that today if you want it. It's also fully shared. Think about that just for a moment. What if we could go back to 1982 and the value that we all saw in supply chain was realized? I knew what I was going to build. They knew what I was going to build. They knew what we were going to build, and everybody moved at the same time. Well, if you use all these data sets, it can actually happen. You have to take action on it. It allows you to be now both tactical and strategic. In other words, it is our supply chain. And it's here, and it's today, and it's operating. This stuff that we've been talking about is not theoretical, by the way. It's in place, and it's working in companies in your industry today. So here's the path. And then I suggest you take a bit. Don't go big. Big always fails, right? Big plans fail mightily. Isn't that what we all learned in grad school? Yeah? Set some strategic goals, start very small tactically. Then start correlating some data so you learn how to use it. Ensure that you're capturing good data. Most people use terrible data. It's wrong. And we all use it and believe we know what we're talking about, and it's wrong. Ensure that you've got good data, guys. So then get smart and build a system that we were talking about. Once you know you're collecting good data, you've got the acquisition, the use, the analytics in place, start layering new data into a system. And here's what I would ask. This is not AAA baseball. You have to get some really smart guys on your team. And I would just say one more thing. As far as AAA baseball, and I'm going to have now a commercial announcement if you'll give me just 10 seconds. And that is, we have veterans coming home every day. They're really smart. They know supply chain. If you need to add people that know how to do this stuff, look to your veterans. You got some people out there coming home that are really good at this stuff. Lastly, I'll say just this. When everybody's talking about autonomous vehicles, all the sexy stuff in the industry, it's all about the refrigerator, right? Thank you.
That's good. Okay, thanks very much, Bill. I think a passionate and insightful look at changing, the difficult thing of driving change in an organization, and of course what data and technology could mean for that. I'm a little bit worried about the next time I go into a meeting with Louis whether I'm going to get shot, to be honest, though, after some of the advice that you gave. So I'm going to probably keep my mouth shut a little bit. Thanks again for that really great presentation. And now I'd like to invite Bridget Grewal from Magna International.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. How are we today? Good? Good. Well, I'm going to talk to you about, obviously, big data, and the way that I'm working through it is packaging, material handling, and logistics. To us at Magna International are key components of world-class manufacturing. And some things about Magna you might not know. The number of Magna plants is growing exponentially, as you can see here. We needed a way to be able to help us with the transportation and to get the number of trucks that we're shipping per week under control, get the containers moving in a system that's available. As you can see, we've tripled what we've been moving in the last 9 years, and it's growing. We're buying, we're selling. We get new plants every month. We have to adjust to those new plants. We have to adjust our trucking or transportation strategy. And how we're going to save on those transportation costs is going to be with synergies that we're going to be able to capture over the 130 plants that are in North America, and then take that strategy over to the plants that are in Asia and Europe. And so what I'm telling my company right now, which is very decentralized, is that if we can work together and if we can actually make a plan, then we're going to be better. I need to stop this. So what I wanted to show, what I wanted to show you was how we're going to do that, and then talk about that data a little bit. So what we were able to do, Magna, as I said, was decentralized, and they were very motivated to be able to grab some synergies between us, but they weren't understanding what could happen with packaging and transportation that would be able to optimize it, because they were so focused on doing their production and running all of those machines and all the things that we do every day, putting out fires, that we didn't have a chance to look at the optimization of packaging and transportation. So what I was able to do was talk to my plants and say, if you gave me some data, I would be able to actually take that data, give you some focal points of where you're going to be able to save some money, and you should be able to do this without too much resources dedicated towards it. Well, they looked at me and said, it's just packaging, it's just transportation. I gave the idea to my bosses and they laughed, and I'm like, no, we're going to be able to do this. And so where we're at right now is a Magna pooling model. This has been done when I worked at Ford, I did this. When I worked at Chrysler, I did this. And it's basically just taking containers that we're shipping right now that are empty and are emptied in Saltillo. We ship those up to Detroit, make them full, and ship them back down, so that's a closed loop. But then we also have other plants that are having containers filled in Detroit, shipping them down to Saltillo, emptied, and then coming back up empty. So if I can get those containers full, traveling both ways, then we have an optimization of transportation and an optimization of packaging. So the company, because of the decentralized model, is still very immature in the way of container responsibility and container the discipline that's needed when you go to a returnable container system. It's not mature in Magna yet. In some companies, and of the 130, I'm going to say at least a quarter of them are very on top of it, and they're used to using returnable containers and understanding that those containers can't sit stagnant, you know, in a hallway somewhere. But the other part of Magna doesn't understand that. And for my pooling system to work, I need everybody to kind of be on the same page. So what I chose to do, rather than going down the path that Bill was talking about with the automated type of data collection, was I needed people, and I needed companies to be able to let us use their knowledge so that we could optimize what's going on inside of Magna. So what the strategy was is I went out and I collected PFEP data, plan for every part, and that is where you designate a part number that is with a container, which is with a number of pieces in that container, which is with how many pieces you need per year to do that, and then you obviously buy the containers. But instead of using a tracking device, which I think is only useful when there's a mature system, we had to use we're using a manual tracking system. So it's aggregate, and we're using ASNs, and we're using our EDI, so that the releases and the ASNs are actually part of our tracking system. And my company is used to using ASNs and EDI, so that was an easy transition for me to convince them that we would be able to do that. So the way that the program is working right now is that the containers will start at Magna Plant 1. We go through a cross-dock that is controlled by Hollingsworth. We take that to a part supplier that is local to that Hollingsworth cross-dock. Then we ship those parts into Magna Plant 2, take it to a cross-dock, a Hollingsworth cross-dock, part supplier, back to Magna 1. So now what the system looks like is Saltillo has parts put into a container. Those containers get shipped up to Detroit full. That container goes over to a cross-dock. It gets emptied in Detroit seating, goes over to a cross-dock, gets cleaned, delabeled, counted, and then redeployed out to another supplier in the Detroit area. Then it gets filled, shipped down to Saltillo, and there we have it, the loop. Now the key inputs for this data, as opposed to being tracking device, because I said we weren't mature enough to be able to use an automated tracking device, we have a company called RPM that's using a software called SmartTrack, and they're using their eyes. So the containers come into the cross-dock, and somebody goes over there and actually says 1, 2, 3, 4, and they validate that with the EDI and the releases that this container is actually moving and is in the loop. And then if something is wrong and we ship a supplier 100 containers and they only ship out 80 containers, then the person actually gets on the phone and calls the supplier and says, well, you guys have, we gave you 20 extra containers, what are you doing with them? And then we find out that way what's going on. So the big data that we were able to capture has actually been in existence, and we just were able to use, like I said, the EDI releases and the ASNs. And so now it comes to the people. And so we've got the system going. We have suppliers that are in place that are able to help us do what we want to do. But what we need are the people inside of Magna to be able to participate in the program too, because I want them to make sure that we are moving those containers the way that we are. So what I have to do is go around to each one of those 130 plants and basically give a sales pitch like Bill was talking about. And I have to convince them that if they let us go through this transportation exercise with their packaging becoming returnable as opposed to expendable, that we'll be able to save them not hundreds of thousands, but millions of dollars. And so what they need to give me is people that will be able to they don't have to spend their whole day on it, but they just have to be able to nudge the system along and make sure that if there's static containers in their plant, that they're willing to push those containers out and understand, get some discipline into the system so that we can, in the future, hopefully go to some kind of automation tracking the way that Bill was talking about. So I went through this really fast because I think we're running short on time, but I wanted to make sure that everybody understood how the big data came in with no budget, I didn't have, I couldn't go to a company and say, go to my 130 plants and go collect this, collect that. So I had to sell to my companies that if they give me some of their precious resources, that I would be able to get that back to them. Then I wasn't able to go out and buy some new software and be able to implement that into the system. I had to go and partner with some companies outside of Magna and say, if you trust me and if you know Magna and if you understand what we're trying to do, this is going to make you some money. So you got to put some effort into this up front, and then you'll be rewarded at the end. And we were able to do that. And then the last thing, like I said, was selling to the plants that if they and their suppliers participate, that they'll be able to save millions. And right now, I think we're targeting somewhere around 25 million for this year. And then one more thing I wanted to talk about before we go through the end, which I guess that's there, was with this data that we collected, now we're able to see the picture. And what that picture showed me was not everything is a traditional expendable to returnable conversion going into a pooling system. We also had to get one-way transportation or one-way containers in the system. And we also needed to talk about service, because those volumes are obviously too small to go into returnable containers. So then we partnered with other companies like CHEP and with another division of Hollingsworth NAL, and those companies are actually helping us with those outliers. So all the data didn't fall just in one straight section. It was, this is the cream of the crop here, and then we have all this other stuff that we need to deal with on the side. But if we didn't collect that data, and if we didn't analyze it from a big picture point of view, we would have never been able to actually ship with one-way containers or with contain our service either. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, and I think we're going to have questions later. So we're good.
I'll take it. Okay, thank you very much, Bridget. I think there you had a really kind of hands-on example of the big data. Actually, it followed nicely from what Bill said, even though it wasn't necessarily the same technology, I think, in terms of the cultural change and effort that it takes from that side. And we're certainly not talking about pennies here, 25 million target this year of savings. I mean, I'm not sure anyone could really want to say no to that. Before we open up to Q&A, we have another panelist joining us here with Ben Shain from Nissan. So Ben, maybe you can just kind of kick us off with a few thoughts about what big data is currently meaning for your supply chain at Nissan right now, or any other reflections you might have based on what you've just been hearing this morning.
It's on.
Yeah, you're on now.
Good morning. So Ben Shain, Director of Logistics, and I've got responsibility for inbound production parts, both international, domestic, as well as finished vehicle and last mile operations. But in terms of data in the auto industry, obviously, we're very reliant on data. That could be, any department from manufacturing, design, quality, finance. We're using data every day to drive decisions in our operation. And for supply chain, it's really no different. I just wanted to touch, on a couple of successes from this past year. We had a very successful year as a company overall, but in supply chain, we had several key contributions that were, contributing to the overall company bottom line. So. And we use data to do that, obviously, but we didn't use the big data that Bill was talking about. But I think we're going to end up getting there to, allow us to be able to continue to optimize our networks. But in terms of the outbound, we had damage-free improvements from 99.6 to 99.7. So that means we went from damaging every for every 300 vehicles delivered, we had one damage. Now we've gone to every 344 vehicles, we have one damaged. We improved our on-time performance by 1 percentage point. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that's significant in our world. We also trimmed a half of a day in terms of our lead time. So how did we do that? Through a lot of the track and trace that we have in place on our finished vehicles, looking at where do we have the dwell, where are the opportunities to better schedule, better connect in terms of the railroads and so forth. So that's the outbound. I also want to look at this past year. On the inbound side, we had a couple of key contributions from the team through really a lot of analytics. Truck fill ratio, TFR, we gained 4% improvement in our truck fill ratio. That's significant. we go from delivering a container or trailer to the plant every 2 minutes 4 seconds to now only needing it every 2 minutes 12 seconds. Or cutting out 270 trucks delivering to the plants on a weekly basis. So very significant contribution in terms of inbound as well. We also are moving forward to improve our on-time performance. We've in the past not had a penalty for early deliveries. So as we grow our plant's volumes and get more space constraints, we have to optimize on the inbound side. So we're really tightening in on that delivery window. Areas for opportunity, I think, as we continue to look at our abnormal spend, we'll end up getting to the big data concept. We're also going through an analysis right now where we're doing lost cost opportunity. So we're taking a very deep dive, looking back at each of the business units and how did the business practices, business decisions play out, what could we have done differently, and putting real dollars to that. So I guess in summary, it's not really just the data. I think the other key components, when I look back, this past year, we had some alignment changes in terms of our performance metrics. So now multiple departments share the same KPIs. So in the past, they may have looked at, well, cost reduction's not really my area of opportunity. They're coming to the table now. How can I contribute? Because I'm now tied to total delivered cost. How can we improve that? I would also say that we've done staffing changes where we've rotated. We added a senior manager. We've got 7 now, and 4 of the 7 have rotated. So I think that really, Bill, you mentioned some of the naysayers killing them. I wouldn't suggest that. I would suggest maybe rotating them, putting someone in a different area and have them a fresh look, because it does a lot for the organization, for the manager to come in, ask questions. Why do we do these processes? What value do they bring? And then the staffs are also being held accountable to explain their areas and why we do what we do. So overall, I think it's more than just the data, it's the staffing as well. So.
Okay, thanks for that, Ben. There's some interesting insights there of what's going on with Nissan. Again, maybe not big data with a capital B as yet, right? But using the information that we have to drill down and then looking obviously towards the future opportunities. And I appreciate killing the staff with kindness, perhaps, rather than outright murder. That's what we'll advocate here. That's a self-preservation, maybe, again, since Louis and I don't always see eye to eye. Well, we're going to open it up now for Q&A. As we've done the past few days, we'll have mics going around. You can say your name and company. If we have anything from the audience, we're right. There was a young gentleman, the party animal. Or maybe just dancing up there in the front there, I don't know.
Hi, my name's Slushy Lushy Louis from Automotive Logistics, and it's more an observation and a comment rather than a question. It's what you said, Bill, about big data being information that should be shared throughout the whole company. A few years ago, I was at Fiat Chrysler, or probably Fiat as it was at the time, and the CFO of Fiat Auto became the head of supply chain for Fiat. And when I had he was quite early on in his job, so I went to see him, and I remarked that for a CFO to become the head of supply chain, it must have all been about cost cutting. That's why he must have been brought in. And he said, no, it was the opposite. He said their president, Sergio Marchionne, actually thought that the CFO in a company touches all areas of the company. They touch production, manufacturing, sourcing, sales and marketing. They collect a lot of information from all of these areas, they analyze it, and they send it back out again to all of the different areas. And he said that's exactly what the supply chain management guy should do. Supply chain touches all areas, sales and marketing, even if it's just through the vehicle, to the dealer and service parts and so on, and from the sourcing all the way through the production process. And again, they do exactly that. They collect information from all of these areas, they analyze it, use it, whatever they need to do, and send it back out. So I think it kind of showed your point, Bill, about big data or the sharing of information is very important in the role that supply chain management plays in doing that throughout a whole organization or a whole company. So that was just an observation.
Did we have another hand up for a question? Well, if anyone wants to dance with Louis, you can also just go right ahead and do that. I wanted to just, this isn't going to be all about packaging, this discussion, but since the first two presenters touched on that, Ben, perhaps you can talk a little bit about how Nissan manages its containers, or what you are doing. Do you have an internal pool? Are you using external provider? Are you doing anything specific to track them in the way that was suggested by either of the first two presenters?
Right. So for Nissan, we manage our returnables through the supplier actually owns the returnables, and we fund it through the piece price. But in terms of management of the returnables, we have those sorted in an off-site location, prepared for the outbound dispatch. And really, that's probably the biggest opportunity for us. I mentioned earlier about the abnormal spend. We have a lot of cases where suppliers will call up, we're short on packaging, and in order to keep their plants running, we have to expedite the returns back. In the future, we'll have the ability to be able to track those, not just from an ASN, from a carrier pickup standpoint, but also from a quantity standpoint per supplier. So we'll be able to make better decisions, more informed, and be able to reduce those abnormal costs that I was talking about.
And is that you'll know that through a scanning process, or are you looking into something like RFID?
Yeah, we're just now in the early stages of piloting some tracking devices to be able to have better visibility on our packaging.
Okay, that's interesting. Bill, obviously you're, again, not everything you talked about maybe was just about RFID or anything, but that's one of the tools that you mentioned and what the equipment is using. What are you finding barriers in, because obviously for that to really be effective, you need the infrastructure at as many of the locations that the packaging would be touching. So is that something that you're seeing progress on? Is that still a drawback? Is it more about concentrating within a particular plant and tracking it there and at the out and in, as opposed to necessarily all points in the chain?
There are plenty of barriers. Most of the barriers are historical in several ways. There's been multiple failures at most companies at deploying technology. So that's, to folks and many of us in the room, that's risky business. And that's maybe the biggest barrier. The second barrier is that not only has there been failure in the past, it's an unknown, right? So we speak with a Nissan or whomever we're working with, and how do you build a business case around an unknown? We all know we need it, but we also know that you can't get funding if you don't have a really good, solid business case. So perhaps those are the two biggest barriers. The third barrier, I think everybody in this room is overcoming every day, which is it takes some really bright people to make it happen, and very dedicated people. And in supply chain people, as we've known, really work very hard. Most of their successes come from heroics, right? One of the things that Bridget talks about, and she's absolutely right, and I applaud what she's doing, it's the first step, right? And it takes people, and it takes people to be dedicated to something. Well, supply chain typically has been a lot of really good people working really hard, and then all of a sudden, well, where's that truck? And I'm gonna shut my plant down, I gotta find it, and then I gotta offload it, and I gotta hurry. It's heroic after heroic after heroic. Those are the three challenges. Mm-hmm. They're being overcome because now we're having more and more success. With the success comes the business case, and the people like Georgia Tech that we heard from the other day are putting out incredible minds now that can work with this. And so I think that our change is coming really rapidly.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Bridget, I mean, I can sort of imagine if you already have to do sales pitches for 130 of your plants just to, maybe get them on board with looking a bit more carefully at this and using methods they're familiar with, that the RFID option was maybe just a step too far right now, for example, as a sales pitch or as an investment. Would that sort of be the barrier you'd point to?
Well, to use a system like that, you really need to have some maturity around your discipline with the returnable containers. Otherwise, the system will go crazy right out of the gate, and then you're going to lose all your credibility, all your support, and things are going to fall down. So I considered that. I investigated going through some automated type of tracking, and I just saw it too risky for this company. Yeah. We looked at that when I was at Chrysler. We looked at that at Ford, and we actually implemented some of those systems there because the suppliers and the plants were understanding the importance of keeping the containers moving and having that discipline. So I looked at it, and I really wanted to do it, but I just didn't think it was going to be successful. So we're going to wait for a little while for the system to mature, and then we'll look at it again.
And in that kind of push, sales push as we put it, how far do you see it coming right now? I mean, how far can you roll this out, whether it's in North America? Do you see it going global, or what's the kind of...
That's a very good question because, I'm also responsible, as I said, for Asia and South America and Europe. Our Europe team is very successful in having intimate data available, but they're not very successful in knowing that they can share between themselves. Mm-hmm. And so I'm bringing that concept of the synergy together in Europe. In Asia, we're at the level that we're bringing data into one central location, very immature again, but again, they're motivated and they can see the good things that we're doing in North America, so they're working hard over there. And in North America, as I explained, we are just at the very beginning of getting the data collection, getting the software, getting the databases together, and all of that.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. Have any questions, points from the audience? That's the impacts of the slushy lushy Louis, I think. Forgive me, Bridget, if I sort of missed this. Behind this, is there a kind of dedicated packaging management system that you've sort of created, or are you using another system? Because I also believe that MLE in Europe, Magna Europe, has some sort of packaging management system that they had been using, or planning system or something like that.
Yeah, we went into detail with them because we thought we found the Holy Grail, and I was so excited that we had a database that I could use. But that system is more geared towards transportation cost comparison. So it's for lanes that are being optimized, which is obviously very important, and we're saving millions and millions doing that. But as far as packaging, it didn't really give the tracking system that we needed, and it didn't really create the discipline. And so, although I think that's ultimately where we're going to go, we're just not ready for that either. If you can imagine.
I can imagine. And Ben, maybe shifting gears slightly, not necessarily only on the packaging side. I mean, Bill talked about the real-time supply chain and that sort of ambition. How would you say, how effective is Nissan right now at sort of reacting to, let's say, real or immediate changes, whether it's variations in your production, and then changing your frequencies or re-engineering your supply chain, if not in real time, but as quickly as possible to avoid blowouts, to avoid those kind of disruptions down the chain?
From a flexibility standpoint, I would say we're extremely flexible. Maybe in some cases, my team would say too flexible. We have to respond to the market, right? And from our manufacturing processes, we've got integrated systems in place where we can, flex when gas prices increase, when they decrease, when we need to be building more cars or more trucks. We have that flexibility within the manufacturing process. But we are very flexible, and we're always looking at what is the data telling us in terms of what's the market demand.
Yeah.
So from a scheduling standpoint, we try to fix our schedules 3 months out. And obviously we have changes, within that 3 months. But we're trying to do a better job of staying fixed to that schedule, because there are a lot of cost, impacts with being flexible. So I mentioned earlier about loss cost analysis. We're really trying to show there's a cost for being flexible, and our organization needs to understand that, so that as we're looking at what decisions to make, we make the best decision for the business.
When we talk about big data, and I think Bill mentioned sort of Google, banks, a couple of ones that maybe perhaps only really get at big data, right? Nissan supply chain is huge. There's a lot of trucks going to Smyrna or Canton, but on its own, maybe it's not as big as if you then considered Volkswagen or Toyota in the region or whatever, putting it all together and say, maybe now we're getting something like real big data. So how open would Nissan be to kind of putting that sort of information together into a network? And again, a little bit like we heard maybe yesterday, but to really sort of see what scale effects could come.
Yeah, we're very interested in the big data concept from a supply chain perspective. I mean, we've done the different analysis, as I touched on earlier, in terms of improvements that we feel like we can make. I think we've gotten to a point where we're probably going to hit a plateau. If you take a look at truck fill ratio, like I mentioned, we can probably get to 77%, another 3%, but that's in an ideal world. Yeah. So we're going to have to bring in the big data analytics to be able to further optimize where those opportunities are to create more value within the organization. But we're not there yet from a supply chain standpoint. Obviously, sales and marketing and groups like that have adopted, data management much better than we have at this point.
Mm. And Bridget, I mean, a lot of the challenge you describe is sort of just pulling it together within Magna, let alone maybe going beyond. But so again, is it more internal challenge for you right now than maybe looking beyond the walls of the company, or are you also interested in a further network effect?
Well, the challenge right now is with, I think I'm getting past the Magna. So I think everybody is on board with what we're doing, and they can see the opportunities there. Now we're going back to our supply chain, and our suppliers need to be on board with that too, because we need Magna to have discipline, and then we need our suppliers to have discipline too. And the suppliers come from different ranks. There's some that are big, that understand returnable containers, and they're easy to deal with, but there's some that are pretty small. Or they're in such a remote location that it's difficult to get them to be part of the pool. So those are the challenges that we're having right now. Is we can see the center of gravity of where all the suppliers are at and where the location of the cross stock should be, but we need to get them engaged and make sure that our analytics that we're doing is actually taking into account the people and the way that they're acting and the disciplines that they know.
Yeah. Bill, with the solutions and the systems that Surgere is offering, are you finding more success or more willingness amongst the tier suppliers or at the OEM level or outside of automotive? Or where's the kind of most openness?
I think everyone was waiting for the technology to prove itself. In the last 6 months, I think we've launched projects with 4 OEMs and 8 tier ones that are all looking to find ways to collect data in their supply chain. And it's what we talked about before. First of all, the acquisition technology to gather data. And Magna's doing a great thing. But we're all doing that. Think about that. Chrysler's doing that. Nissan's doing that. But, we've got a client that thought they were losing 4% of their containers a year, but it was more like 20% and 50% going into Mexico and back. Well, the reason that they really enacted the big data collection technology was that we work on assumptions. We have people counting. We have suppliers counting. And guess what? They're busy. They got to load trucks, right? And they're wrong. And they're wrong big. Well, you don't have to be wrong big a lot of days when you have so many plants to be off real big. So what's happening is that people are going, wait a minute, I'm losing, and this is no kidding, we have an OEM that's losing $200 million a year, right? Well, it isn't just mitigation of loss anymore. What they're really saying is, if we really can serialize every piece of moving asset and learn everything about that movement, then I can heat map every one of his trucks in real time. So he's saying he wants to jump up a few points in fulfillment. Well, how better to do it than to have actual real-time data, right? So that's really, I think, what we're starting to see. We're starting to see people enact the technology because they're imagining the outcome.
Right.
They're paying for it by loss reduction, but they're really trying to get where we've just been talking about.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I mean, from a cost standpoint, you mentioned $200 million. That might sound like a huge figure. How in the world could you be spending $200 million? I think really it goes back to the business case that you're trying to put together. There are so many factors involved in the business case, in terms of, can you reduce the fleet size overall? Can you reduce the time that you're spending tracking the containers? So there's just a whole host of cost associated with the tracking of the returnables that have to be factored in that business case.
Any other points or questions from the audience? I think you're starting to think about your coffee. Maybe a last point, maybe on the packaging side. Obviously, we're talking a lot about the returnables, but obviously maybe some of even the bigger money gets spent on racking, on specialized equipment. And we talked yesterday a little bit in the opening session, as vision of much more standardization, where maybe we're not spending millions on bespoke packaging for so many different products. So I wondered, maybe starting with Bridget, is that sort of packaging standardization? I know it's quite complicated because there's so many different pieces and shapes and things, but is Magna making progress on kind of a wider packaging standardization within the plants as well?
Yeah, well, the good news is Magna has a lot of our suppliers in expendable packaging right now. And so with the vision of what we're trying to do with the pooled system, everybody realizes that they need to go to standard containers to be able to optimize. So that's a very simple, easy way to do that. Some of the plants that are a little more mature in returnable containers have deviated from standards. So they have vacuum form trays, and they have things that are very specific to those parts that we can't really pool. We're not going to attack or look at those parts right now, the ones that are mature. It would be great if we could work with the people that understand packaging and have that discipline in returnable containers to start our program or to make it mature. But those are the ones that are in the unique containers. So we're kind of going from scratch. And we're kind of saying, all right, if we keep these containers standard, then we'll be able to do this. And I'm hoping that it's going to make it easier for all my plants to be disciplined when they know that a 48, 45, 34 should not be sitting with service parts in it on the counter. In the warehouse. So that's what I'm hoping.
Ben, do you want to add anything to that?
I would just add, from a standardization standpoint, obviously, as you get more packaging variations, then it does impact your ability to optimize either your footprint, your trailer filling ratios, and so forth. There's certain windows of opportunity when you can make those changes with the packaging. For us, we get a fleet, and it's for the model life. So, and in many cases, the model life's extended and so forth. But we're starting to look further upstream and try to determine how can we reduce that. Through our benchmarking, both internally and externally, we've seen that there's a direct correlation with packaging variation and cube performance. So we're trying to get ahead of future models. How can we reduce the pack variation?
Great. And let's build you on any last points on that? Or?
Only that now we're talking about maybe one of the most complex algorithms of all time, right? Because we want to cube, we want to reduce cost in the supply chain, and we have manufacturing people that are saying, yeah, that's great, but I only have so much room at the line, and I know that cube is great, but if you send me 50 parts and I only need 13, then we're in trouble. So I think to Ben's point, and it's really true, is that there's a certain segment that's perfect, right? We have friends here that are really focused on that. You have to be very careful not to take a sample and believe that it generalizes. You have to be very careful with what our friends were talking about at Georgia Tech, because it's not a system of socialization, right? The fact of the matter is we're all very independent. Our lines are independent. What we send and how we send repair parts are very different. We all heard that. Well, you can't use a single container to solve all those problems. You just can't. So it's brilliant to take a few examples and really work that formula, but it's not something that works everywhere every time. And we have to be a little careful with that.
Okay. So you're against the communization of packaging. Keep it relatively capitalistic and free market on that side. Well, thanks. I think that's a good, unless there's any other questions or points from the audience. Actually, we'll thank you.
Thanks for the additional discussion on packaging. I want to just make a comment on the commonization. I think it's important. We talked yesterday about the potential integration of service parts with production parts. And I've got to say that, as I mentioned yesterday, that when we were independent service part inbound, I didn't have to worry about shutting down the line. I just had to worry about, was one of my service parts customers on back order? Well, now that we're integrating and our milk runs will now be integrated and we'll have OE parts with OES parts together, now I'm worried about that customer of the back order, and I'm also worried about shutting down the line. So, with the integration comes some responsibility with it. I think that what we're having to do in the service parts world is we're having to really look at having smaller closed loops of returnable packaging. And the key for returnable packaging also is what I call small lot, high frequency. Are you going to those suppliers every day? Are you picking up every day? Are you emptying those returnables every day? Because if you're not, you're going to have a lot of dwell time and a lot of variation. And then that's going to really probably have an impact on your logistics cost, on your expediting, and of course, importantly today, that when we first began returnables, it was to reduce deforestation, CO2 emissions, and be environmentally friendly. In the modern world, if you don't have returnables, you don't get parts. This is kind of how it really has gotten to. So I think that commonization has a limit. And then I really appreciate what Bill said about going into Mexico. There's tariffs, and there's tariffs going in and tariffs coming out. It's a pretty complicated situation because when you cross a border with a returnable, it changes. So once again, I would recommend closed loops for those international boundaries because they each have their own customs and compliance laws along with it. So I wanted to mention that I think standardization, commonization is a great situation, but it also comes with risk. And I think as we integrate, you really have to respect each independent loop of the supply chain. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Appreciate it. Okay, great. Well, if there's no other questions or points from the audience, I think we can end it there, but not before I thank our panel for their presentations and discussion. Enjoy coffee, hosted again by Surgere, and please don't forget your evaluation forms. Thank you.